This is the Ideas Podcast, the show where instructional designers share ideas over a nice cup of tea. Warning: other beverages may be consumed. In this episode, I catch up with Luke Westwood, founder of the eLearning Mentor, about careers in eLearning development and why he thinks we should move away from developer as a job title. Okay, so today I've got Luke Westwood with me here for a bit of a chat about all things L&D and specifically e-learning and e-learning development. So hello Luke, thanks for coming on the show today, and I guess introduce yourself.
Hi Tom, thanks for having me. So I've been in L&D e-learning for about 5 years now, coming up to my 5-year anniversary, and this is my career. Like so many people in this field, I found it by accident. I was 25 when I got my first job in e-learning as a developer. I was a bit in the middle of a bit lost in my career, wasn't really sure where I was going. I was panicking as well. I tried so many different things, from IT to customer service to SEO and web design. Nothing had really worked out. I was applying to another IT job, and then my first e-learning job came up through the agency, and they said, "Do you want to give this a try?" Applied on a Friday, had the interview on a Monday, prepared over the weekend to learn Captivate, and I think like so many people, you fell into it. And I always used to hate that phrase when people say, I fell into this, or it just landed on my lap. I never really understood it, and then until it happens to you, you kind of realise what they mean.
Absolutely, and I think the vast majority of people in the industry, whether it's e-learning, digital L&D, or even more traditional L&D, I would say 80 to 90% of the people I've ever spoken to have, for want of a better phrase, fallen into it. It's not the sort of thing where you ask an 8-year-old, what do you want to be as an adult? No one comes out with, well, I want to be an e-learning designer or an e-learning developer or an instructional designer. It just doesn't quite make that list, does it? That's
Yeah, it's just one of those things, like we were saying earlier, just before we started, that you just don't know about this career as a career, and then suddenly it pops up when you're looking for a job, and you're like, oh, I'll give that a try. And I think that's just what so many of us do, which is a shame, really, as well.
Absolutely. You think all those, I know certainly I spent a lot of years learning a lot of skills, which are all wonderful skills, but I do wonder if I'd have spent all that time focusing on what I now really love doing, how much better would I be at it? It's a real challenge for us as an industry. But I know one area that I was really looking forward to speaking to you about specifically in this episode is the kind of pure development side of e-learning. And it kind of sounds a strange thing to be excited about, but I would say so much of the industry now is made up of developers who are also / instructional designer / graphic designer / animator / audio editor. And I always get worried when someone has 16 core skills. The question surely has to be, can you actually do any of them well, or can you just use some software? So I really just want to start with what might seem like a really, really basic question, but I think the industry probably needs to think about it a bit more, is what is the role of a developer versus any of those other things?
I think the title developer I have a bit of an issue with, because when people think of development, they usually think of coding and web coding or software coding. And whilst there is some of that in what I do, it's very, very minimal. And I like to use, I think a better word would be e-learning creative, because it's quite confusing when you say to someone, I'm a developer. But really in my job, I mean software like Captivate or Storyline, or I go into Adobe Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, and I'm constantly switching between all of them. And like you say, how do you do one of those really well? Or is it you have to learn all of them? And I think with development, you kind of do really, unless you work in a really big team. And I work in a big company at the moment, but there's a very minimal resource for like skills like developing and animating, like specific people that do it. And even a few who do it just dedicated to that, they're still switching between different software like Photoshop or just different skills. It's a really difficult subject, and development isn't something that people think about as a career as well. But if you're into software, you're into being creative, and you're into things like video or animation, it's a real chance just to try different things and learn so many different new tools and software, and the technology you see is amazing. And that's something that really excites me about being a developer. And going back to your point about IDs and instructional designers switching, and I see it so many times, like you get developers who want to go into instructional design, or you get instructional designers who want to go back into development, or they switch back because they didn't like it. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think it's something in our industry which is quite unique to us, I think, where so much switching does happen in these two roles. But I think it's part and parcel of being a developer. You just have to learn lots of software and just be comfortable with it, really. And I think that comes with experience and over time, and just not being afraid of trying new software.
I think that's a really fascinating way of looking at it, actually, because you are right. You talk about developers, and sort of my lasting experience of working with people who call themselves developers was working with software developers who worked in C# and those kinds of things. And you are right. It's a very, very different world. Let's say with rapid authoring tools, giving rapid authoring tools. I'm not sure. There's something about the use of the word rapid that kind of almost makes it sound like they're a bad thing. But of course, they're not. These funny,
it's these funny phrases we use in the industry, like say rapid, and I don't really understand it. I guess what they mean in a way that you can create a course quickly, but when you start getting into a certain level of development, as you know, and as your career progresses, you get away from importing things from PowerPoint. I think that's where it comes from. I think in the early days of development, it was very much turn this PowerPoint into a Captivate or Storyline project, and I think that's where the word rapid comes from these tools. But I think over time they'll get away from that. But the more complex you go with a piece of courseware or a course you're making, it's never rapid. It just takes time, and I think people underestimate that. Absolutely.
I think there's similarly all those tools, regardless of what we label them as, they are exactly that. They're tools. So there's always the ongoing argument of, do you prefer Storyline or Captivate or Camtasia? What's your authoring tool or your approach? And it's always struck me as in no other industry does that happen. You use the right tool for the job. You don't go to a carpenter, what's your favourite saw or hammer? Or when someone's building a house, what's your favourite kind of brick? You use what's relevant to the problem you're trying to solve.
Exactly, and I always use the analogy of the Windows and Mac debate, and at the end of the day, it's just a bit of software and a bit of hardware for your computer. Going back to the Storyline or Captivate debate, which has been going on for years, again, I think that's a bit of brand loyalty marketing going on. I started my career a bit backward. I started with Captivate, whereas most people start with Storyline. I used Captivate for 4 years in my first job, and then came to the new job I am at the moment, a much bigger company, a much bigger team. Everyone was using Storyline. I came in as a Captivate guy. There weren't many people using it. That's changing now, which is good. But for me to use Storyline, I haven't used it for a long time. And when I go back into it, it's like a new language almost. But it's whatever tool works for the job and what you are comfortable with, really, I think.
Yeah, and I think they've reached the point now where pretty much all the big players offer all the core functionality you're going to need. Certainly some do some things better than others and in different ways of doing them, but I think gone are the days where you look at the finished result and go, I can see you've built that in such and such because it can only do this, that, and the next thing. Which is
I think when you're a developer, you can easily, there's a sad part of being a developer where you look at those nitty gritty things and you can kind of tell what's been used in Captivate or Storyline. But to anyone else who's got no knowledge of this, they will never know what software you use and they don't care. And but for us as developers, we can look at the error messages that pop up or silly things like that, or the interface, and you can kind of tell what's being used. But that takes years of experience to see. And but yeah, again, it's the tools, the software. It's just using what's good for the scenario you're using. And things like Captivate, there's benefits for Captivate, things like accessibility and different things that Storyline doesn't do so well, but Storyline's getting better at that. And maybe in a few years' time, it might overtake Captivate for accessibility, and they're constantly trying to find out what they can do better. But again, there'll be the market for each piece of software out there, I think.
Absolutely. I think it's at the moment it's almost an embarrassment of riches, right? There's almost too many options to choose from when people are starting out, which is a question that you sort of see everywhere about. If I want to be an e-learning creative, let's say, rather than a developer, what do I need to learn first? And I guess it'd be interesting when people ask you that, what do you tell them? What would you learn first if you were starting off today?
If I was starting off today and I knew I wanted to be a developer, I don't think I would have started off with Captivate, to be honest, just because a lot of people are using it, but when you apply for jobs, a lot of them want Storyline. And that's where I'd go to first. Some people say use PowerPoint, use all the features of PowerPoint. I agree in some way, but if you haven't used Storyline and you go to a new job and you haven't touched it before, I still think you need that basic understanding. I would have started out with Storyline. It would have made my career a bit easier in terms of changing and progressing, or just seeing what else was out there. I'll start with Storyline, and then if you want to look in Captivate, go that way, or definitely use the Adobe stuff as well. Captivate and even things like Photoshop and Illustrator. Just get the basics, understand how to do simple tasks on YouTube channels or online training. There's so much out there to learn now. I don't think there's really an excuse not to learn it. That's where I'd start.
Well, no excuse not to learn it. How long has the L&D industry been telling everyone that, and now we need to take a lesson for ourselves, right? That's... it's
just funny, isn't it? We're a training industry. We create training, but we make it so difficult for ourselves to learn what we need to learn to do our career. It's just one of those ironic things, and we kind of you just resist training yourself as a training developer or ID or any role in training. But yeah, it's just a funny quirk of our industry, I think.
Yeah, I think part of it is it's a reluctance to admit maybe that we don't know as much as we think we know. It's whether we've been in the industry for a few years, a long time, it really makes no odds. You tend to find people get into it. My wife always, she being much smarter than I, describes it in terms of like Dunning-Kruger. The more people start to learn, the more they think they know, and actually they've just scratched the surface.
And I got into a bit that kind of phase for a while in my career where I thought, I know everything about Captivate, or I use the basics of Illustrator. It took me a long time to learn Illustrator, but you kind of get into a flow of using the same things every day. And it took me a long time to get used to the idea, go to YouTube and find out how to do this. Again, it's that you think you know everything, and then when you start learning new stuff, you realise there's so much more to learn.
Absolutely. It's funny, like... But way back when I was at college, I studied music technology and lighting and sound for theatres and audio production. So just planning to launch a podcast, I kind of thought, I've got the skills that I need for this. Things have moved on a little bit, it turns out, technology-wise. It's
changing all the time.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest wake-up calls I've had in years, is that kind of maybe just dusting off the old kit and the old software doesn't quite cut it anymore. And it's and as you say, with instances like YouTube and Google acting as the single biggest two learning platforms on the planet, with millions of pieces of entirely free content, there was no excuse not to go and get the skills that I needed to sort it out.
Yeah, and YouTube has been a lifesaver throughout my career, and the online forums like the Adobe forums or Articulate forums. There's so much information out there, but YouTube really was, when I needed a Captivate tutorial or Captivate crashed on me in the most important part of a project, which often happens. You're publishing a project and it just crashes on you. You go to YouTube.
Product after all. That's
Yep. But yeah, it's just one of those things that you go to YouTube, go to Google or LinkedIn. It's just so much stuff out there now.
Definitely. And I guess that kind of leads into the next thing I want to ask is, a lot of the advice that's out there in the industry is around what it's like to be an instructional designer, what it's like to work in training and learning and development. But what's it actually like being a developer or an e-learning creative day to day for yourself?
It could be high pressure, especially where I am at the moment. It's a much larger firm compared to where I used to be. Even though the firm I worked for before, it was a big company, but my team was a lot smaller. I was working in defence, in the military, doing online training for the Navy, which was really interesting. And now I'm in a firm working in London, and it's all a much more corporate environment, and the pressure can be quite intense. But over time, you get used to it. I've been there a year now, coming up to my first year. And when I think compared to where I was this time last year when I first joined, I've grown so much. And the idea of having just a few days to do some development, you get used to it. I guess it kind of goes back to that rapid part we were talking about earlier, but that comes with experience. I think you need a good few years under your belt to get really comfortable with the software and the tools. Like I said, I'll be in Captivate or Storyline most of the day. I'll be in Photoshop making changes to photos and edits. I'll be in Illustrator creating artwork or vectors and icons. I'm constantly switching between the two. And then you've got the meetings to go to with your team, updating the project managers, updating the team leaders. So yeah, the communication is a huge part of being a developer or any team member, really.
And I guess then, kind of as you know, over the years that you've been doing it now, as technology's moved on, do you find that the newer technologies are addressing those challenges, the challenges around communication, the importance of it, the sort of, you know, the clear role it plays in you being able to deliver the kind of products people expect from you? Are the big players addressing those issues, or are they doing, you know, what businesses often do and create other things instead?
To be honest, I think it's the new kids on the block that are doing it. A great example is a software called Evolve. If people aren't familiar with it, it's a web-based e-learning authoring tool. And they have some great review functionalities. So when you are working in a large team, you can have people reviewing the software, reviewing the course. They can leave comments. You can reply directly to them. You can message them. And especially where we are at the moment with everything being remote working, Evolve has been amazing to work in. As much as I love Captivate or Storyline, having that inbuilt functionality for reviews, for communication, it's really been a massive improvement to what we're used to. I think the old days of email-based feedback and using spreadsheets, they'll be around for a while. I think we have to use them for certain softwares, but I think as more things go online and collaboration goes online and in the cloud, I think that's what will really change the industry.
And I think if there are positives in the current situation in the extreme long term, or well, not positives, but perhaps a silver lining from a purely business point of view, perhaps that that needs to evolve. Our approach to communication and feedback is going to be huge.
Yeah, and I think that will come with time as well, as we settle into our new normal. As much as I hate that phrase, I think we'll get used to. I think we'll find new ways of doing it, and we won't be in the office as much now. And I think we'll want to make our processes more streamlined, more efficient. And examples like using online review systems or centralized review systems rather than sending spreadsheets back and forth with amends and comments to change and updates to make. I think it's a natural progression, really.
I think Microsoft will be glad to see people stop using Excel for things it was never intended to be used for. And I guess it's sort of similarly, funny you've mentioned Evolve. I've recently started learning Adapt, the open source authoring tool. Okay. Which was an experience, because as much as possible, I like to work on Linux to get away from Windows for a while. So it was nice to find an authoring tool that was just like, Linux, you run Linux, we like that. Come and just install it with this.
That's different. I've not heard of Adapt before.
Yeah, it's a really great tool. And it's open source. It's free of charge. What more could you want from an authoring tool, right? That's but I think it's a good example of how sort of the development communities actually come together to say we're gonna create something to add huge value to the industry. Because as I say, there's no money in it really. But when you give away software for free, It's clearly for a love of the industry.
Yeah, and I think that's happening more and more now. Recently, I was watching a video online, and I came across a new animation tool which I'd never heard of, and from what I've seen so far, it looks amazing, and I think it's got real potential for e-learning, especially not just motion graphics and animation, but also e-learning and how we do our animated videos, and maybe going away from the more traditional tools that we're using at the moment. I think a lot of people are starting to share more in our industry as well, which is great. It's been a long time coming, I think, like sharing the work we do or the knowledge we've got. I think people have been a bit too precious for too long in terms of sharing our industry and sharing people how to get involved in it and passing things on. But I'm starting to see a real shift in that now, which I'm really happy for.
Definitely. I think that's it can only be a positive thing. As you say, people like yourself sharing that experience, that expertise, and that more human side of it as well. I think there's a danger, especially on the digital learning and development side and the e-learning side of things, that the industry behind the end product becomes invisible because the end user shouldn't, in theory, see us. That's kind of the point.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the fears I know the industry has had about sharing content or even sharing knowledge is because it's all part of a business, it's all IP and it's all money based, but sharing knowledge and showing people how to do things or sharing new tools and skills, I think that can only make our industry better, really. I think it's a good thing.
Without doubt. That's and hopefully we right here are being part of that. So that's hopefully our good deeds for it. Absolutely, that's it. It'll storm the barricades of isolation working and share some best practice. So I guess there's kind of like an overriding message in a lot of what we're talking about, in that sort of careers in development or as you say, e-learning creatives, which I love that as a replacement for developer.
I think it's a nice one.
It's a more accurate description.
Yep.
Because I, as you say, I can't remember the last time someone literally just went, oh yeah, people send me everything completed in its finished form and I just throw it at the nearest authoring tool and click export. It's a lovely idea.
Yeah, and
don't get me wrong, sign me up for that job. It sounds very, very quick and easy. But I don't know anyone that does that.
No, and you see these new terms coming out like learning experience designer or experience designer, and I think we're trying to find new ways to make it sound sexier than it really is, which is nothing wrong with that, of course. But I think things like using the words creative, which is used a lot in the film and video world. I used to work in the film industry for a while, and that term was used all the time. And it's one that just encompasses all the skills that we've been talking about, maybe not the e-learning side, but all the motion graphics, the artwork. You don't need to call yourself a developer as such, but I like the word creative because it's an umbrella for it all, really.
No, I think that's a solid argument for an industry-wide rebrand there of the job. So pay attention, everyone. Go back to whoever you work for and tell them your job role needs changing.
And I think on that point as well, recruiting talent would be a lot easier
yes.
if we were to use terms like that. I know how difficult companies find it, especially going back to the point that e-learning just isn't known as a career. I think from the development side, I think if we made it more open to creatives and didn't focus solely on looking for people who learn Captivate or Storyline, we can teach them, they can learn it themselves and we can show them. But the more we bring on people from a creative background, I think that would make recruitment and talent acquisition so much easier.
I mean, well, absolutely. You look at the, it's very early days, but you look at the expansion of AR and VR into the L&D space. That's not, but from my experience of meeting these people, it's not being driven by people who have been instructional designers. It's being driven by the VR and AR existing community wanting to find new ways of using the technology they're really passionate about. And, that would surely apply to every technology that we use. You find the people that are passionate about that and you bring them in, rather than trying to say, no, we're the guardians of learning, we'll learn your skills but you will not enter our world.
Yeah, and it goes back to that to protectionism of our knowledge and of the IP and everything. But I think the more we open up, we just start allowing people to come in, allowing different industries to come in and people from different backgrounds and skill sets. It can only be a good thing. And we always need more talent. Every industry needs more talent, but creative world especially, the more people you can bring in from different backgrounds and different sectors, I think that will make a massive difference for us.
So it certainly will. So I know sort of something that you're really, really focusing on at the moment is sort of opening up those career paths for people. And trying to find ways of reaching out. And I really just wanted to sort of say, what are you doing around that? And, how can people get involved, and what are you looking to do in terms of bringing people into our industry?
Yeah, so I've kind of branded myself as the eLearning mentor on LinkedIn at the moment. It's still work in progress title, but it's really about making eLearning known as a career and also making it accessible as a career as well. I'm still figuring it out. It's a bit of a challenge, but I think doing things like this, posting content online, I want to get more involved with schools as well, showing people at school what the type of career you could have in this industry, whether that's high schools or going to universities as well. That's something I'd love to start doing, going to universities and talking about how we can turn teaching into an online career. I know so many teachers want to work in this industry as well. So that's something I'm trying to focus on as well at the moment. But it's just making it accessible, making it known. I think that's what it comes down to. There's so many careers people know about from a young age, like a doctor or a policeman or a firefighter, which is fantastic, and they're amazing careers. But there's a lot of careers out of the mainstream that you might not be aware of, and sadly ours is one of those. And my focus on this is really just trying to bring that out to the masses. Like I say, it's work in progress, but if anyone wants to get involved, they can connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to partner up.
Fantastic. And I think we sort of said a few times there are things that we can do in this industry that will only do good. They will only improve things, and this is the sort of perfect example of that, and exactly what the Ideas podcast is all about, giving a voice to. It's about sharing ideas across the industry and reaching out beyond what we might consider to be our space, our little world. And I think saying about universities and schools, I think about the amount of time I spent going through several different potential career paths before eventually I went, there's something about this learning thing that I'm quite interested in. I could probably have been 5 or 6 years more invested and engaged and educated and practiced in what I do had I realised it was a career at the start.
Yeah, and I go back to my career advice, quote unquote. All we really got was a week's work experience in a company that was local that would take someone on for a week. But I'm sure things have changed now, but we didn't get much career guidance at school. I'm 31 now, so it's been a while, but I wish I'd known about this type of career like you when I was younger. So yeah, I'd love to get involved with schools, universities, and just figuring out how that could work in terms of introducing e-learning to them. But yeah, so that's kind of my focus at the moment.
Brilliant. Well, obviously, if anyone's listening and has an opportunity there and you'd like to get in touch with Luke, I know you said do connect on LinkedIn. We'll make sure we have a link in the description for today's episode. In the meantime, I just want to say thank you ever so much for agreeing to come on the show, Luke. It's especially when launching a new podcast, you never know quite what you're signing up for. So I appreciate the leap of faith, as it were. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, similarly, links will be in the description for today's episode. Luke, thank you ever so much for your time this evening.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoy it, and hope to be back soon.
I'm certain you will after this conversation. I'm keen to have another. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ideas Podcast. If you'd like to continue the conversation with me or Luke, or just get in touch, our contact details will be in the description of today's episode. The Ideas Podcast is all about sharing ideas from across our amazing industry. So if you'd like to get involved and come on the show, get in touch. Drop me an email or message me on LinkedIn anytime and we'll catch up over a nice cup of tea.